Disaster relief organizations such as FEMA in the United States have perhaps unsurprisingly looked into disaster preparedness. For our purposes, disaster is being defined as a situation or a set of circumstances, either man-made or natural, so severe that absent rescue or relief, there's a high probability of harm, up to and including death. The results of the disaster preparedness research by FEMA and other relief organizations found that survivors of disasters may need to wait for up to 3 days before rescue or relief may arrive. And this led to their recommendation to members of the public to put together what they call a 72-hour bag, sometimes more commonly referred to as a bug-out bag or a go bag or a get-home bag. Whatever you choose to call it, it is essentially a portable bag that you can take with you in the event of a disaster or an evacuation, in which there are resources available to you to help you to manage to look after yourself and perhaps a few family members as well for a period of at least 3 days, hence 72-hour bag. In this series, we're going to look at the individual components of such a bag, with a view towards helping those of you looking to assemble a 72-hour or bug-out bag in making better and more informed choices about the kit you choose to put in it. In today's video, we're going to have a look at axes. Now, an axe is a percussive cutting instrument using leverage to increase the force and cut into wood. It's a very effective tool for processing wood, and there are many different kinds. It's also one of the oldest tools known to man. We use steel axes today, but before steel was iron, before that bronze, and if you go back to the Neolithic period, stone axes. It is a useful tool, which is why it has been in continuous use throughout the whole of human history. Stay tuned. Now, not every axe is going to be useful to you, but not having an axe would make life a lot more difficult. So I recommend that in your 72-hour bug-out bag setup, you have some kind of axe. But what kind? There are a lot to choose from. We're going to have a look at a few. Broadly speaking, axes can be subdivided into 3 categories: the large two-handed axe, the hatchet, and the tomahawk. And what distinguishes the one from the other is the length of the handle and the width of the blade. But there are various subcategories as well. For example, we're going to have a look at an axe head here. Now, this one is just the head. It doesn't have a handle at the moment because I'm in the process of restoring this one. But this is a typical axe for a two-handed axe. It'll have quite a long handle underneath it, a good 32 inches. And this is the sort of thing you would want to use if you were a lumberjack taking down a 500 or 1,000-year-old oak tree. This, without the handle, weighs in at over 5 pounds. It's over 2 kilos. It's very, very heavy. It's not something you'd want to carry around if you could help it. Likewise, on the hatchet side of things, I have here an East Wing splitting hatchet. And what you'll notice about this is it's very wide wedge. And of course, it's very heavy. It's essentially a lump hammer on this side and a cutting edge on this side. And it's not hugely big, but it weighs a lot. As a matter of fact, if I just put this one on the scales, it comes in at almost 2 kilograms, so over 4 pounds. It's very heavy. And it's not an accident because it's designed to put a tremendous amount of force into a piece of wood. And this wide wedge is meant to push the fibers wide apart quickly, causing it to split the wood quite easily. And while relatively compact, it is very heavy. So again, not a really good choice for something like a bug-out bag. Another type of hatchet, much, much smaller and much lighter, is something like this. Now, this is almost a novelty item in my eyes. It's more of a knife than it is a hatchet. Something like this might be more useful for food processing, chopping herbs and such, rather than necessarily as a wood processing tool, although there are some jobs it would be suitable for. Weighing in at a little over 300 grams, or less than a pound, it's limited in its use partially because the length of the handle is so short, it's not really giving you a leverage advantage, which is what you want from an axe handle. However, this now brings us to ones that I might recommend. Now, if you wanted a full-size axe, there's a rather good one made by Cold Steel, which I personally like very much, and this is mine. And this has about a 30-odd inch handle, and comes with a nice little sheath to protect the blade when it's not in use. And interestingly enough, this one is based on a Viking design and is essentially a bearded axe. Now, what I like about bearded axes is the metal that is not where my finger is rotating right now doesn't weigh anything because it's not there. This is made with modern steel and is an excellent chopper. I've used it for chopping trees, chopping logs, splitting logs rather. It works extremely well. And it has a full-length handle. It's relatively light. One of the things about this one that makes it suitable is it weighs in at about just under 900 grams, so just shy of about 2 pounds, somewhere in that vicinity. Now, this is about half the weight of most axes you'll find in a DIY store. Modern chopping axes tend to weigh in at about 4 pounds, so they're a lot heavier than this. As a result, one like this I would recommend, because if you have to carry your axe and your gear and you have something that's very heavy, that's going to be problematical. But this is an option that would give you a full length axe that you can strap to your pack that frankly will not weigh you down excessively. On the other hand, most people will prefer the hatchet. Now, the hatchet is very similar to the axe in as much as it has a wider blade, but a much shorter handle. This one's around about 16 or 17 inches, about 16 inches, I think, the handle length. And again, this one I bought just as an axe head, and we put the handle on, and I handmade the sheath for it, again, to protect this. This is actually quite a sharp blade. It's like a knife. And if you have that loose in your pack, you'll slice up all your stuff, which is not good. But the nice thing about this, this is the length of say a large hammer. Now, again, this is somewhat bearded, which makes this one very light. And again, this one, if we just weigh it, comes in at just over 600 grams. It's about a little less, a pound and a quarter, not even a pound and a half. One of the reasons I selected this one is because, again, this is a narrower blade. Now, it does widen up here, so the thing about the narrow blade, and I'll actually come back to this full-size bearded axe, Cold Steel. If you actually look at the cross-section of this one, it's quite thin. And because it's so thin, this bites when this is sharp, and it is, and you hit it with full power, it bites very deep into the wood and causes it to split relatively easily. Similarly, with this particular hatchet, I have a cross-section which is quite narrow at the front before it widens out. So this will tend to bite in deeply, although sometimes it doesn't go all the way through deep enough in order to split the wood. However, all you need now, once it goes into the top of the wood, is a maul. So this is a maul. It's similar to a hammer, but basically it's just made from a piece of wood, a bit of log, what have you. This is a fairly small one that can be made larger. You saw into it part way and then split the outer part of the wood off to give yourself a handle, and then this part you can hit with. Now, the nice thing about a maul if you smack metal with it, you're not going to damage the metal. You're not going to have bits of metal splintering off. Whereas if you use a metal hammer, if I tried to, and I'm not going to do it, but if I tried to hit this with something heavy and metal, I could actually get metal splinters fracturing off, and that's actually particularly an eye hazard. But the thing about this particular hatchet is, bang it into a piece of wood. You can either lift the log up with it on this and smack down again, and that often works. Once or twice is enough. But if you didn't want to, you could literally use the same maul that you would use to baton wood with a bushcraft knife. You can use to smack the back of your hatchet, pushing it in, and if you have a nice wedge shape here, once that wedge goes in, the wood fibers will split. Worst case scenario, you give a rotational move with while you're holding the wood steady on one side, you rotate and it levers off the wood, and you split your wood relatively easily. This is relatively lightweight, pretty compact, a good choice. But you might want something even lighter. And that's where the tomahawk comes in. And again, this is one, I just bought it as an axe head, and then I put the handle on it. Again, we're looking at about 16-inch. I prefer something a little bit longer like this because it gives me a deal of leverage, particularly with something as light as this. Because this hatchet, which has a much smaller blade area than, or the tomahawk, I should say, which has a much smaller blade area than the tomahawk, or the full-size axe, is relatively light. And so having the longer handle gives me the leverage to give sufficient impact. Now, in terms of weight, this is one of my lightest tools, weighing in at just under 400 grams. This thing weighs less than a pound. And for camp-related tasks of processing wood, it's amazingly good. I've taken this on many camping trips and have used it with great success in processing wood for tools or for shelter or for what have you. It's an excellent, excellent tool. And to be honest, unless you're planning on chopping down a tree, this might be hard. It's a bit more than it's designed for. But for normal camp tasks, it's absolutely fine. If you are trying to chop down a tree, a hatchet such as this one, with its wider blade, will be sufficient. And by the way, with the 16-inch handle, you have good leverage with one hand, or it's even long enough to use it two-handed, because you still have a good gap, and so you're able to spread the load in terms of the shock value on your body a little bit more evenly. Though ordinarily, I will be honest and say that I normally use it one-handed, the fact that it can be used two-handed, should it be necessary, is optional. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is talk about the very and many brands and different kinds of handles. Some of them have metal handles, some of them have plastic handles, some of them have fiberglass handles, some of them have wooden handles. There are slightly different shapes and so on. There's a wide array of axes, and what I would recommend you do is a bit more research into what's available in your local area and what wood processing requirements you might have in a disaster scenario in your local area. In the end, the decision is yours. All I'm really trying to make you aware of is certain ones are so lightweight that for an emergency use, it's probably not going to help you very much. Others are so heavy. An axe like that, not practical if you have to be on the move. An axe like this, likewise. Although in my fireplace, this is very useful for splitting the odd log without having to necessarily need a two-handed axe. The problem with that is it's meant to be kept in my fireplace. I'm not hiking with it. The other axes I've shown you, from large to small, are relatively lightweight and relatively usable. Now, Cold Steel make tomahawks and full-size axes and hatchets, as well as other companies, and I'm not specifically recommending them, although they do a good job. I will say this one, which is the cold steel one, has a rather unconventional facet of a worm screw in the back to hold this on. I did find, although it's incredibly useful, eventually the head did start wobbling a bit and I put a wooden wedge in the top and now it doesn't move. There is another wedge trick which I'll show you on another one of my axes that is, well, from antiquity. It's a Viking style axe, but it's also a Viking style repair for when the axe had went a little wrong. Now, this axe is in the style of the Viking Guard from around about 1,000 years ago, which were mostly Vikings and working for the Emperor of Constantinople. And although this looks a very fearsome axe, I've actually used it quite successfully and effectively for wood splitting. It has a beautifully wide blade, but it's not as heavy as you might imagine, although it is about 4 pounds, which is about the same weight as the average splitting axe or the average felling axe that you will find in a DIY shop. I did actually put a wedge in the top, but like a lot of axes, you have the wood flares out because you have a wider piece here than here, and the blade, when it's put on, is pushed upwards till it gets to the point where it can't get through anymore. One of the problems with this axe head, and you may have this on an axe that you use, is it came loose and it kept trying to slide down. It wasn't going to go off the top because it's too wide up here, but it did want to slide down. And I used a technique that archaeologists showed us that were actually used by Vikings over 1,000 years ago. And that was, I made a metal wedge here and pushed it up underneath the side. And that's locked this in place and it hasn't budged since. So again, a simple repair technique, should you have a wooden handled axe where the axe head becomes loose, there are ways of wedging it from above, obviously, but also from below, if that's what's relevant. Now, again, I'm not telling you which one to get in terms of size or brand, make, model, what have you. That's something you're going to have to actually ascertain because your local area may be different from mine and your needs may be different. But at least you have some idea now of the different types of axe that are available. And as I say, when I first saw the tomahawk, I thought that's silly because it has such a small head, it's not going to be useful. And I found it was extremely useful for all sorts of wood tasks shy of chopping down a tree. And I do actually like the full-size axe, especially this one because it is a bearded axe and therefore relatively lightweight. But this isn't for everyone. And again, the weight might be a bit high for you. The compromise has always been the hatchet, and there are different models, and some of them are heavier than this. I went for this one particularly because I had something that was much lighter in weight. But to be fair, for camp tasks, the difference between this hatchet and this tomahawk is smaller than you might think. So it depends on what you're most comfortable using, and a little experimentation doesn't hurt. But at least now you have some idea, hopefully, if you didn't already, of what kind of axes are out there, and maybe give you some idea of what you might like to look more deeply into. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and useful, and I hope you like this. If so, please click like, and please share this video. Let's try to spread these around as much as we can so we can have more content in future. And I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good one.